Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission podcast. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and I'm here with my amazing co-host and sister, Rachel Smith.
Hey, everyone.
We are on a mission to encourage and inspire others as they're navigating through this life and with our listener, relationship with Christ. And today, we're going to be continuing our discussion on health and our favorite topic, pharma. Specifically, we're going to be diving into an extremely important topic for parents. And for the sake of potential censorship, we're going to be avoiding using certain words. So just be aware of what we mean when we say certain things. But the product that we're discussing today is none other than those included in the childhood V schedule, or injectables might be the closest word that's going to spark your familiarity. And from here on out, we're going to refer to them like that or by the name of the actual injection, like Tdap or the chickenpox V or something like that. Just to be conscious, we want people to be able to hear this information, and we don't know what platforms are going to get mad at us for that. So we are actually being joined today by a very, very special guest to really get to the heart of this issue and what's going on. Her name is Angela, and she has worked in healthcare for 15 plus years. As she has discovered the truth about what's being injected into our children, she started speaking up about it. And this, of course, has not come without a lot of difficulty for her. So we appreciate, Angela, you and your courage and your strength as you're exposing the darkness. So if you want to check out Angela outside of the podcast, be sure to jump on Instagram, and you can find her at faithful_free_mama, MOMMA. Angela, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited.
Yeah, it's a controversial topic, but you hit it. And I seriously,
it is.
When I just say how awesome your resources are too, because you come at things with such facts. You don't just say things on your page. And that's what I think moms are looking for, are the facts. And you make it easy for them to find those facts and to really dig into the heart of it. So I definitely encourage anybody listening, please go follow Angela and you'll learn a ton.
I
for resources to refer people to. You're the one.
I really appreciate that. I mean, that's something that I always try to do, just because I don't want anyone to ever have to take my word for it. I want them to be able to see it for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was starting out doing this, that was something that was really hard for me, was finding valid information. And I didn't want to just, listen to a clip here or watch something and be like, okay, yep, that's it. I got it. I wanted to dig into it myself, read the studies, read the books, whatever. And so that's what I kind of try to do for other people now.
That's awesome. I remember when I was researching this myself a few years back, and I felt like I was going a little crazy with all the digging I had to do to find certain things. So it's awesome for folks to have a resource that has dug it up and been like, here you go here, go here, go there. But we'd love it if you would start by sharing a bit about your background and how you got to where you got to today. I imagine when you first started in the medical field, things were probably a little bit different, or maybe they weren't that different, but how did things shift for you as far as your experience in the medical field and then your beliefs on certain things?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they've shifted too much, just as like the healthcare system itself, but I have.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
that's kind of like, what's the difference right now?
You've changed, not the medical system.
Absolutely. So like you were saying, I've been in healthcare for 15 years, 10 of which was spent primarily hospital-based. I did some, rotations I actually was an educator at the college, clinical instructor, things like that. So it wasn't all hospital, but primarily it was.
Okay.
And I was really just mainstream. I did everything by the book, because I was taught that way. I was in that world. It made sense to me. I never thought to question things, which was kind of funny because I questioned a lot of things, but I never thought to question this specific topic until fast forward. I was pregnant with my first son, did everything that they told me to during the pregnancy. Then his second month pokes, he had a reaction. Now, it wasn't anything extreme, but it was enough that was like, uh-oh, this doesn't feel right. You know what I mean? Like, I brought him home. The crying was something I've never experienced with him before. He was just, something was wrong. And that mom feeling like something's off, whatever. That's kind of how I felt. And I was overwhelmed by the problem that was happening to him at the time. I called the pediatrician office. The way they handled it and how they treated me in that moment was also another indicator that something's not quite right here. So I started to dig, started to look for stuff. My sister-in-law actually was the one that told me, why don't you go see an ND or like a natural doctor and see what they have to say about this and whatever. And in doing that, she's the one that gave me my first real source, because initially I would just go in, I would Google something and it would not really give me what I was looking for. So going to the ND, she gave me that source, and then it kind of just started opening up more things. And it was almost like I just kept falling into more information that I was looking for all along. And I went back to my pediatrician to talk to them about it. They weren't super happy. We ended up getting kicked out of that office. But really, that was kind of the shift and what turned me into this world that I'm in now, and really investigating things further and finding the information for myself.
That is very interesting. And I think a lot of moms can relate to that similar story about getting kicked out or not being able to go there at all. And I think it's very telling. Rachel was actually the one who got me looking into this when I was pregnant with my now 3.5-year-old. She said, you're pregnant, look into this, just look into it. And so, you have to have a pediatrician before I was having a hospital birth back then. Now I'm home birthing, but when you're having a hospital birth, you have to have a pediatrician before you leave the hospital. And so I called ahead of time and to ask them about, do you do delayed schedule? Do you do whatever? And they're like, no, we don't accept anybody unless you choose to fully V. That's it. And that was really one of those moments where I was like, something's up with this. And, through some other resources, was able to find the couple of people in town that don't follow that strategy. But, of course, later learning, there is a financial model that is tied to making sure that kids are fully V'd. And there's a lot of stuff that's deeper that I'm sure we're going to get into some of this. But I just was reminded by my own brain to mention that anything that you hear today is not medical advice, and we are not providing medical advice of any kind. And disclaimer.
We're having a conversation.
We're having a conversation.
I relate to a lot of what you said too, because I went along with the normal schedule of things with my first, and even at the beginning, my second, but I always in my gut hated those days at the quote unquote wellness visits, would see behaviors, especially in my first, that we never experienced otherwise. And interestingly, I think there's this misconception that people choose to become anti-Vs. It wasn't a choice. It actually was these pediatricians and the way that they treated me and my children, and these sketchy things that they would say that pushed me out. Like you being kicked out of that practice, I wasn't kicked out, but they blatantly lied to my face. And I'm like, this is a weird thing to lie to me about. And that is what got me researching. So, that's kind of how it goes for some of us, or unfortunately, having a child be injured. So.
Right. I think that's so accurate. And because this this side of the topic, I'm not saying I'm one way or the other, but when you get to a point where you question or where you're anti or whatever, that's not the popular side. So
Yeah.
that's always why, like, if someone comes to me with information from that side, to me that they've obviously looked into things. They're like, to get to that point, it's not like they would just choose on their
Yeah.
own to
It's
go
not the
down.
easy road. It's the
Right.
way harder road, especially if you
Mm-mm.
live in certain states. If you live in certain
Absolutely.
states, I mean, you are making the hardest, you have to homeschool.
That's what felt impossible for me is I had my kids in California, and this was 7 years ago. And at the time, I had that gut feeling and I tried looking into it, but it was like you were ostracized there if you didn't, at least in the area of California I was in.
Mhm.
And it feels so much easier to just go along with what everyone else is doing until you become a mother and you're now not, these aren't decisions for yourself, and you care more about your child than you do yourself or anyone else. And that's the heart of the matter, is as mothers and anyone who's listening to a mother, like, whether you choose your most comfortable with doing a normal V schedule or not, all you want is the best for your child.
Mhm.
And when you start seeing things and really feeling in your gut, this isn't what I feel like is best for my child, to go against your gut feels worse than going against what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
And it fact of the matter is it sucks. Like, it doesn't feel fun. But
Yeah.
when I moved to Texas, that's when I felt like it was like something in my brain unlocked, and I did all of the research, because I think what I was subconsciously doing is not allowing myself to open up that box fully before then, because I knew that it would be too hard, and I knew that it would hurt too much. And that at least moving to Texas, I felt like there was more, not just like medical freedom, but freedom to make our own choices in general without judgment. And there's actually doctors here who respect choice. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
I can't imagine, Angela, that it has been easy. I know that it's been pretty recent that you've started to share this stuff on social.
Mhm.
And I just remember 2020 happening and getting a little bit vocal myself on my personal page and having people that I'd known for a long time literally delete me and be like, "Oh, I've known you for 10 years, 15 years, like, forget you." And, unfriend, we're not friends anymore. And
It's
it
one
kind of
thing.
makes you feel like, "Oh, man, like, should I just not be talking about this stuff and be the peacemaker?" But as time has gone on, that has been something that the Lord, I know, has called me personally and Rachel to as well, is it doesn't matter what anybody thinks about us as people. What matters is forwarding his kingdom and forwarding his vision and mission for, being his mouthpiece. And even if it means that we're ostracized and we're the weirdos and we're cast out, rejected, Jesus went through a lot more than we went
Oh,
through,
absolutely.
getting deleted on social media.
and
He would definitely get fact checked. Yeah.
So it's kind of a beautiful thing when you get to that point where you realize that it's not about validation from humans, and we don't need that. It's about being a mouthpiece for the Lord, because there is going to be somebody out there that needs to hear something that we're talking about. And Rachel and I have mentioned that we've kind of been tiptoeing around this topic. We've mentioned it, but we haven't really dove into it deeper. And it's because we want to do a service to it. And we want to come about this from a place of, you know, truth, but also a place of speaking to it from the Bible and from a biblical perspective. So Rachel and I have we've been coming out of this kind of background on the word pharmakia from a biblical perspective and what that means as it pertains to also the Nephilim and to Greek mythology and kind of this deception of the enemy within our current medical system and kind of how that's ingrained itself from many, many years ago into now. And we personally feel that these V's are a continued attack from the enemy to deceive us as humans. And I think that that's something that we're going to dig into a little bit today when we talk, especially about ingredients and what is being injected into our human bodies that the Lord created. We had a naturopath doctor, Dr. Vaughn, who he said it best. He said, God didn't put a man in a white coat holding a syringe in the Garden of Eden. This wasn't something that he didn't make a mistake when he made our bodies. He created us in his own image. And yet here we are messing with his creation, creating all these concoctions that we are then pushing into our bloodstream. And so anyway, this is all to say, I know it's not been easy for you. I appreciate that you're talking about it. You mentioned to me you're an introvert. And so it's interesting that you're finding yourself in this position. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So I don't know where that's from, but I'm actually more extrovert. So maybe I mistyped when I was talking to you.
Oh, you said I'm not an introvert by
I'm
any
not
means.
an introvert.
I just don't know how to read.
I'm
pregnant, remember?
Yes, pregnant brain. So for me, I've been speaking about this in my social circles for a while. Once so my son, the one that had the reaction, he's gonna be 5 in May. So it's been quite a while. And when I first found out, it was so overwhelming that it was like when you first, not to equate it to being saved, but how you just I got to tell everybody, it was almost like that. I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much that I had no idea. I would just cry. And then I was like, okay, now I got to do something about it. So I know I need to share it and I got to do that in the best way I can. So whenever I share any information, I always just try to share the truth with love, because I'm not here to harbor anything against anyone. Whatever you choose is your choice. But to me, I just wish I had the information to make a choice that I felt comfortable with. And I felt like I was denied that. And I don't think that that's fair.
Yeah.
So that's really my goal, is just to make sure you have the information, and whatever you do with it, that's totally your choice.
Yes.
But I just don't like that that's not an option for so many people.
Absolutely. We have a lot of folks in our audience that are in the exploratory phase of the childhood schedule. I actually had a friend reach out to me pretty recently, and she started just asking me questions because she knows I post things here and there. And it was so beautiful to have that conversation that someone was they're wanting to research. They're wanting to know more. They're questioning things, but they don't know where to start. Their pediatrician, is telling him one thing. And like if you go to Google, Google's going to tell you not the right things. Just saying, they're
only going to tell you one side. Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody's paying the bill that's getting those results. Just FYI, you could try DuckDuckGo, but you're going to find similar. It's a little better. So perhaps maybe our listeners are even feeling overwhelmed. So what advice would you give to a parent who is in that exploratory phase and kind of starting out?
Sure. So really what I think is, it is easy to get overwhelmed, right? And then it's almost like too much information, you just got to shut down. So I think the best thing to really do is just start where you're at. So whatever age your child's at, or your potential child, whatever, just start looking there. Start with 1V. That's it. So go to the CDC's website. You can see the immunization schedule, and it tells you what age group they get each one of them at, and then look at the first one and then start there. So, okay, Hep B, day 1 of life. That's the one I'm going to start at. I haven't, I'm pregnant, whatever, if I were in your case. So then what you can do is go to the FDA's website. They list everyone that's licensed in the United States. You can click on it. It's going to be patient insert or patient information, and then package insert. You want to use the package insert. So when you go to the physician's office, they're always going to give you the patient information sheet. That's not the same thing. Okay. The package insert is going to tell you so much more. So it's going to tell you the ingredients that are used. It's going to tell you any possible side effects, things like that. Trial data, which is really important, how long things have been studied. So, I mean, that's a huge one too that I didn't know about. So like, as far as the inserts are concerned, again, hepatitis B, since that's what we're talking about, if you scroll to the section about trials, especially like, I think it's the recombavax, that one was only monitored for 5 days. So they gave this injection to the baby and did a solicited reaction safety monitoring time of 5 days. That is it. So if something happens on 6th day, it's not related. Okay. And there was like 147 people or children and infants in that study. So that's really small as well.
Yeah.
So this just kind of gives you a better understanding of exactly what you're going to be able to find out with the package insert. Okay. Then if you want to look in other places, so I like books. I have a plethora at this point. One of my favorites is To Be or Not to Be. So obviously, you know, the words are really what we're trying not to say. By A.M. Antonio. So you can just find that on like Amazon or whatever. But I like that one because it breaks down each injection. So if you're going to what I was saying, like finding the injection for what's next for your child, you can just pop in the book, scroll to that or find that page and look at it. It's very informative. You don't have to read the book from front to back. So you can hop around and piecemeal your information, which I really like.
Okay.
Docuseries are good too, if you like that. So I always like to give a couple different ways to research, just because everybody has their own way that they like to learn material.
Absolutely.
One's called V Revealed. This one, you can either pay for it or you can go to odyssey.com, which is ODYSEE.com. And it's kind of like a uncensored YouTube.
Wow.
Cool.
So yeah, it's really a great way to find stuff that you might not be able to find other places. So you can just type that in. It's a 9-part docuseries, and each of the parts I think are like an hour and a half to 2 hours long. So it's very, very deep, but it's definitely, that's what I started with. That was the first thing that I ever watched. And then I went from there. And then obviously everybody on here likes podcasts. So a podcast specifically around these is the V Conversation. And that's Dr. Sears and Melissa. Episode 9 and episode 77 are the two that talk about all of the injections from birth through. So if you want to just listen to just the episodes on the injections, that's where I would.
Perfect.
Yeah. And then I guess the next thing too would be like, when you do all this research, you're probably going to go back to your pediatrician, right? Because now you have a wealth of information and you want to share it. So when you go to the pediatrician office, if you're changing your mind, right? Maybe you've already started and now you're going to delay or whatever. One thing that just from experience, you can ask the office, what's your policy? Can I delay? Can I stop? Am I able to come back? Because that's one thing that's important before you walk into a situation that you might be put into an uncomfortable place that you are forced to make a decision you're not ready to. So find that out first. And if they're open to it, ask them questions, you know, like now that you have this information, now that you've studied stuff, I think there's some really good questions that you can ask to kind of gauge their level of comfort with V's, because most physicians only have half a day of training at most on the V schedule. And it is just, what's the V schedule, how to give it. It's not necessarily reactions, what's in them, things like that. But I think some really good questions are, which injections contain aluminum? Okay, because that's one that can obviously cause some issues, which we'll talk about. And then even like if they say, you know, oh, well, don't worry about it. Well, then, okay, well, show me the studies that prove that aluminum is safe. Because you must have those if you're going to let my child have them, right? I'm sure you've looked those up. And then another one is like, if my child does have some type of reaction, how have you been trained to detect that? And what can you do to help my child if they have one? Because
good question.
Most doctors don't have that kind of training. And this is not to put down doctors in any way. I think that they, you know, are doing their best, but they have a huge workload and learn so much that this is just something that's not typically taught.
Yeah.
And then also, have you ever reported to VAERS, which VAERS is the V Adverse Event Reporting System. So if there is an injury, they're supposed to report it. So have they ever had to do that? Another thing to think about is, are you going to test my child to make sure that they can properly detox any of these things that you're going to give them? Because there are certain genes that we now know through research that people can't detox all the same, right? There's one called MTHFR specifically, and that's going to reduce your capability to detox, which might mean you have to spread out your injections just a little bit more to give your child time to properly process everything that's in those and get them out of the body. So are they going to test that ahead of time to find out if your child is susceptible?
I've also read some studies that state that if you have MTHFR, you're more likely to be injured.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, because
And I mean, there's a large population that has that.
Yeah, I had genetic testing done last year, and I actually really wanted to test for MTHFR because I suspected I might have that, and I had heard about that, and I have been injured from a few different ones. And I actually came up that I don't have MTHFR, but I have a different gene mutation that affects my immune response. And it is definitely a red flag, which predisposes me to have the reactions. And it is likely one, if not all of my children would have this gene mutation too. So this is a really good point that you're bringing up. Most people don't even know about genetic testing, and it's actually pretty easy to have it done. Although I don't know any MDs who do it. I mean, you probably do.
You could just
Yeah.
ask for it, and they
Yeah.
it's standard blood work.
And
Yeah.
if anybody listening doesn't have a resource, I'm going to recommend Dr. Vaughn again. He is at Spirit of Health. His website, spiritofhealthkc.com. And he works virtually from anywhere with any patient and does genetic testing, does the Dutch panel and everything. So definitely reach out to him.
Another guest we've had on before is who I did my genetic testing and Dutch panel through, and that's Paula Carper.
Oh yeah, have Paul. Yeah, call Paula.
She's a registered dietitian, and so she goes at things from a different angle. But the reason she does this testing is to then specifically help people not only detox through diet, but also, what kind of eating is, healthy lifestyle is best to manage if, you do have, because a lot of these genetic dispositions or genetic markers can predispose us, especially as women, to hormone issues as well. So,
and to other things too. I mean, one of the things that you revealed was through your testing was that you couldn't tolerate MSG at all.
Yeah.
She basically like allergic to it.
Yeah, I have. That was the biggest one. And that was so eye-opening to me, is how I have this genetic mutation that I can't process glutamine properly. And so I know in a few we're going to get into ingredients. And I was looking through some of your notes, Angela, and I had no idea that was in some of these. And now it's like, oh, well, no wonder my health was such a mess for my whole life.
Yeah. I mean, even though Rachel and I were born in the 80s, we were spared what children today are up against, because there's like how many 70 something on the schedule now.
Yeah, I have that as a future talking point as well.
So we didn't and Rachel and I we did not have any in our first few years of life, so we've had much less than other people our age. But it was like every time that we did get one, or Rachel, unfortunately, of the few that she did have had terrible reactions. And so it makes sense because the ingredients that were in them, she's literally allergic to. And same thing for me. I had Rogam during my first pregnancy, which, by the way, go ahead and look for studies on ROGAM for those listening. They studied it on a group of men before prescribing it to pregnant women because they can't test on pregnant women. So anyway, whole other topic. I got to do an episode on ROGAM one day. People have been asking for
Just that one alone.
Just that one alone. But
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, I just, to get back to what you were saying, Angela, I think the point you were making about asking pediatricians that if they do screening or if they can before doing these things, or, you know, giving these injections to our children, because we should as parents be able to make a informed decision for our child's unique genetic makeup.
Absolutely. These are not one size fits all. And that's kind of the medicine world around just these specifically. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you were going through questions to ask a pediatrician.
Yeah. So the next question that I think is really important too is just like, what's my child's actual risk for the disease that you're trying to give them an immunization for? Because I just think that it's on the schedule. We need to give it. Let's go. You know what I mean? And it's, again, back to, this isn't one size fits all. So I think we really need to look at like, what are the risk factors? And then also say, you can even ask, if my child did get it, say, so my child got whooping cough, or my child got, you know, chicken pox, or whatever, one of these things, what else can I do to treat it? What would happen? Is it treatable? You know, like, be ready for those kind of things, because obviously if you choose not to, the potential is always there, but a majority of these are very much treatable. So ask, what would happen? And then, is there anything else I can do to help? Like breastfeeding. Like breastfeeding is huge, and that greatly reduces the chance of many of these illnesses. So I think that that's just something that's also very important. And then, like, why I was saying too earlier on, like calling ahead of time, finding out what their policy is, because once you start going down this road, you'll find out very quickly the environment in an office can get kind of hostile. Like I said, I got kicked out of mine, and it wasn't like a nice, sweet, you know, well, if you change your mind, you can't come back. It was extremely aggressive. I felt like I was verbally assaulted. Like it was like very intense for someone with a, you know, a new mom. My child was a little over 2 months old. Like postpartum, it was just really intense for me. And I am an extrovert and I am pretty tough, and it still got to me. So I think just knowing that ahead of time before you put yourself in one of those situations is important. And like around the whole reason, like, why do they push this so much? And we kind of talked on this a little bit earlier, but they do get an incentive. So pediatricians' offices, if they fall below 63% compliance to the schedule. So if anyone in that office doesn't adhere to the schedule, 63% of them, they'll lose out on this bonus. They get $400 per child. Okay. So if they go below that level, that is a lot of money, because some of these practices have like thousands of patients. So can you imagine not getting that bonus just because someone in your office put you below that level of 63%?
Yeah. How dare they?
Right. How dare there's choice. But again, that's kind of like where I was going with it. And I just feel like you should never feel pressured into making a decision that you're not comfortable with. So absolutely do the research ahead of time before you're put in a situation like that.
Yes, it's important to point out that fact of the compliance, and the reason why they're compliant is this is part of the revenue that they're making inside of their office. And it's not to say that they're necessarily doing it for the money. Maybe some people are doing it for the money, but I think that a lot of times it's just easier to keep doing what they're doing. And I almost wonder if a lot of these doctors and nurses that are in these offices are kind of in a similar situation to Rachel, that they're like, I don't want to go in that box. I'm not going to look at this further because I'm afraid of what I might find. I'm just going to stick to this manual and these papers that are being dropped off at my office by these reps. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. And, you know, because most of the time when you find folks that start to question it, then they're in a whole other heap. They're on the other side, and then they're going through the ostracization process of their own. You know, I'm definitely don't want to name names to get people in trouble, but the medical professional that I choose to bring my children to went through this, where they were doing this in the office and he did not agree. He did his research and he stopped following the schedule and got in big trouble. They were like, no, we're not going to do this. And so fortunately, he didn't care. He stood up to it and said, oh, fine, I'll go open my own practice and do my own thing. So this is to also say there are other options out there. My recommendation would be you could go on Facebook and join like a conservative mom group or a Christian mom group in your local city and ask in those groups like, hey, does anybody know of any
Or Crunchy, my local group, it's not necessarily religious based, but
Crunchy.
it's like Crunchy Moms. And there's levels of Crunchy, but man, are they a resource of
That's a
local.
great place to start for sure, because you
Yeah.
can find like just look at the threads, type in the pediatrician, and you'll find tons of good things there. That's kind
And
of how we found our first one.
yeah, and at least ones that are pro informed consent
Or
and
friendly.
will allow you and respect your decision.
Mhm.
Because the pediatrician I take my kids to now, they do it all there. They're a normal office. But I said when I called, before I ever set foot in there, like you're suggesting, Angela, do you accept families who choose an alternate schedule? And they said, yes, we have a lot of families that do that.
Mhm.
And at our very first appointment, I said, we will not be doing this. And they never once have asked me a single, are you going to do this today or push in any way? They just they know it's in our file and they perfectly respect that. Because what you were mentioning about pediatricians, they have to have a certain compliance level to get certain bonuses. I don't know if that's everywhere, but when I was in California, I personally experienced that. It was one of the things that clued me in, and it was like a red flag of something's going on here, because I was fully following the immunization schedule with both of my kids, but the one that I would refuse was chickenpox, because that's the one that I had the most severe reaction to when I was 9 years old. And I had the first chickenpox injection, and it had just come out on the market. My siblings had both had the disease, and my mom tried to make sure that I got it too years before. She put me in the bath with the oatmeal baths with Rebecca, had me drinking after them to just make, back in the 90s when chickenpox parties were a thing.
I had
We
it.
did that. We did that in our house because my sister and my brother had it at the same time, but I never got it. And my mom never had chickenpox. So my mom actually assumed that I had natural immunity like
But
she
you
did.
did.
And yeah. And so then fast forward like 4 or 5 years when this injection is coming out, and she was taking us to a doctor appointment, and the doctor's like, oh, she's never had it. Well, you need to give this to her. And then fear mongered her that if you don't, and she gets this as a grown up, then she could die. And then my mom's like, but I'm a grown woman and I've been around my
And
kids
she
with
was
it.
taking care of little kids that had it too,
Yeah.
mind you.
And yeah. And they really, really pushed my mom, and she did not feel good about it, but she agreed to it. And within 2 weeks, I had my first shingles outbreak at 9 years old. And I have since had shingles. I couldn't even tell you how many times, over 20.
my
I've
goodness.
lost count. And I will continue to get shingles for the rest of my life. And the frustrating part about it is I never would have gotten shingles, because shingles is the chickenpox virus that's laying dormant in a dermatome of your skin somewhere. And so you can only ever get shingles if you've had exposure to the disease or to the injection. So I could have gone my whole life without shingles, but that specific injection, since it was invented and put on the market, there has been a huge increase in shingles, especially in children. This used to be a geriatric disease. And so I'm saying all this to say, I now have kids of my own. I suspect, because they have the same DNA as me, or at least half of it, that they could react that way. So even though I was going along with the whole schedule, the one that I always said we're not going to do is the chicken pox. And I always said no to the flu, because we never get the flu. And not only at this pediatrician office did they push so hard just for the flu in the first year of life, because chicken pox, they don't even start trying to do that till they're, I think, a year or 2 years, 1 or 2. But I literally had a pediatrician tell me that if my children do not get the flu V, they will die. That was his words. So same fear mongering that happened to my mom decades before. And that's something you have to stand up against if you're not comfortable with something. And then when it came around, when he was either 1 or 2 year appointment, and I said, we can do all of the injections today, but not the chicken pox. The pediatrician, it was a female I was seeing first at this particular office. And she's like, well, can I ask why? And I explained to her the whole story I just explained now of my experience. And her response was, well, if he doesn't get the injection, then he will definitely, and gets exposed to wild chickenpox, then he'll definitely get shingles one day. But if he gets the injection, then he will never get shingles. And I was like, it was almost like an out of body experience, because I'm like,
You're like, I just explained this to you.
did you
When
know
you're
what
listening to
happened to me?
anything,
I
think-
didn't even know how to respond. I was like, are they made different now than what I got? Like, how is that possible? But here's the kicker, is I ended up not liking my interaction with that pediatrician, but I wasn't smart enough to like stop going there. And so I just switched to a different pediatrician at the office, because it was a really big office, for our next visit. That was now a male. He asked me the same question when I was like, he's sick. I saw that he hasn't had chickenpox. He needs that one. And I was like, oh, that I had a reaction as a kid. And he was like, well, what is your reaction? And I explained the story to him. I kid you not. This man says to me, well, if he doesn't get this injection and gets wild chickenpox, he's going to get shingles. But if he gets the injection, he won't get shingles. And I'm like, at that point in time, it was like I was hearing a script.
It's like one of those media montages where they all say the same thing at the same time.
Exactly.
You know?
That's exactly what it was like. So then years later, when I read about how if they're below a certain percentage of fully V'd children, then they don't get the bonus. It all clicked in my mind of, this is why they were pushing so hard for just this one V. Like, I'm agreeing to everything else. I'm telling you that I had a reaction to this, and they didn't care. They literally gaslit me and essentially diminished my experience just to get me to agree to this one. So it really is happening. And I don't know if it's all pediatrician offices, but
Well, I want to add real quick too. So like sometimes especially what state you're in, it is hard to find a good pediatrician that agrees with your choices.
Yeah.
So you don't always have to go to a pediatrician.
Yep.
Like you can go to a family doctor because they see every age. You can call and ask what's the minimum age you'll see. Some family doctors don't want to start to like 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever, but just find out that, and that is usually fine then, because they don't care as much, because they have such a large population of different ages that they don't pressure the same way that a pediatrician office does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You could also go to a functional medicine doctor. You could go to a
Yep.
naturopath. You could go to a nurse practitioner's office. There are there are other options, and not for nothing, it's called a well visit, but the purpose is to get injectables. So if your child is not sick and it's not against the law in your state to not attend, I'd probably err on the side of caution. You can weigh and measure your children at home, I think. right?
Yeah.
Most of us can. I got a fish scale. My son's about to, he's
go.
about too heavy for me to lift him up. So we got to do the whole weigh yourself first and then weigh with the child part, but we can handle that. But one of the things I did want to kind of circle back on Rachel's story is, first of all, yes, it's a script. They do have scripts that they are taught, and that's the easiest way to do things when you get the same question 100 times. You memorize a certain way to respond. But not for nothing, these drugs, so to speak, any drug is going to have a side effect. And those side effects are what keep us in the circle of the medical system. Like we talked about in our pharmacia episode, Ray, if you get shingles from the shot, then you're going to be back at your pediatrician because
Yeah,
you have
how many
shingles.
times I was prescribed Valtrex for shingles?
Exactly.
I mean,
You
I
are
don't
now a
do it
lifelong
anymore, but
customer
yeah.
getting prescribed Valtrex every time that you're getting that reaction. And now there are some doctors that might be able to work with people, and depending on the severity of what it is that your injury is, that can try to help detox some of that stuff out of your system so you don't get those reactions. But this is why we're bringing attention to this topic, right, ladies? Is because we want parents to have the choice to say, I'm not even going to mess with this. Or, they may decide at the end of the day, right, we'll do it. It's up to you.
Yeah.
It's your
I think just
choice.
being aware that there are side effects, because the way it's portrayed is that they're so rare and one in a million. And that is unfortunately not the case. So I think when you start to look at the inserts and you start to read the potential side effects, then you can put things together that maybe you didn't know, like, hey, that seizure, that may have been associated because they didn't tell me it was, but I see it listed on the insert. You know what I mean? So I think just doing your due diligence, and then that way, things that you maybe didn't recognize early on, if your child has been V'd, they may have had an injury that you didn't know until you start reading what all of these can happen,
I remember when I first started talking about this with my husband, when we were first kind of digging into this, and he thought I was nuts that I even would question such a thing, like, oh, this is what everybody does. And he used to say, because I was like, well, it's kind of interesting that all of my siblings and I have had different injuries, like all of us. So it's kind of interesting. And he's like, well, there's just something wrong with you guys. And, he used to just joke, like, there's something wrong with you guys. And then the more he dug into it too, it was really honestly learning about virus was what turned it. And we're going to talk about that in next week's episode. But that is where the turn that it took for him, and it opened when he was finally open to read and really understand things. And he started looking at, and the side effects for this or side effects for that. He's like, when I was a kid, I had strep throat all the time. And he said it was always right after I would go to my doctor visits. And I was like, oh, and he said, I always had ear infections all the time. And it was right after I would go to my doctor visits. I think that there's some association here. I'm like, yeah, think.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of interesting, that we all have things that happen to us. And I don't want to necessarily point the finger at just this, because we live in a pretty toxic world. There's a lot of toxins that could create a lot of problems for us. I mean, quick example, someone who was wearing a lot of fragrance was holding my almost 1-year-old. And when I went to go give him a bath after, he had bumps all over his chest just from that exposure. So there's a lot of things out there that in this world that can cause problems. So I'm not trying to point the finger at, this, but just, these are all things, again, all tools in our tool belt as we learn about this topic. But I think that this is a good place for us to wrap today, ladies, because we have ingredients to get into. We're going to get into what these V's are made out of, what ingredients are inside of them. And then I think that this is going to explain to a lot of people why they're having a reaction, why there are side effects, and what is causing those side effects. Because that's what's really at the root of this, is what are these things made out of? So stay tuned tune it, mark your calendars for next week, because you're not going to want to miss us talking about the ingredients. And thank you, Angela, for joining us for this conversation. We're excited to continue.
Me too.
All right. And thank you all so much for listening to today's episode. If you'd like to follow along, you can do so on social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube at The Radiant Mission. And of course, be sure to follow Angela as well. It can be found on Instagram at faithful_free_mama, MOMMA. Did I say that right?
Yep.
Great.
That's it.
It's from memory now. And if you would like to watch it in video format, of course, I mentioned YouTube, but we have it in video format as well. And today we're going to close with Angela's favorite Bible verse. She had mentioned that this is really what made it click, that she personally needed Jesus and the reason for her salvation in him. And that is Romans 3, verse 23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We're wishing you a radiant week, and we'll see you next time. Bye,
guys.
everybody.